Clicky clicks, yeah.
Hey everyone.
This one?
Yeah, Mr. Bin Juice, that's a nice way to be introduced. So I'm here today to talk about brand. Yeah. What is it good for? Sorry, a bit simple. So it's good for making your performance marketing more effective. Say it again. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what brand is. I'm going to talk about brand marketing, which is different from performance marketing, but also specifically how brand makes your performance marketing work harder and deliver better results. So who am I? As Marisa said, I'm a fractional CMO and coach. I've been working in marketing for over 20 years now. I've got the grey hairs to prove it on my chin, on my hair, even on my chest. I've founded next 2 businesses in that time, and I've helped many more grow. I've worked agency and brand side, including at Lego Group, and I am an advocate of marketing effectiveness. So, whoops,
Sorry, guys.
got to grab the mic. Okay, rock and roll. Is that better? Okay. Oh, I should have sung with this, really, shouldn't I? So I'm an advocate of marketing effectiveness. And for those of you that might not be familiar, that is evidence-based marketing. So it's not about a template, but it is about understanding what works in marketing. And we'll be looking at some of this today in my talk and also in Stephen's. And I also have a hat, which I'll explain later. So let's start with the big question, what is brand? So I am a big fan of podcasts. There's a wonderful podcast called Let's Talk Branding. And the host, Steph Hammerlink, starts every episode by asking the guest to define brand and branding. And guess what? It's often very, very different. So Jeff Bezos, he owns a shop or something, a spaceman. He says that your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room. What I really like about this is that he's framing brand in the mindset of the consumer rather than the business. And it's important to know that because ultimately people buy what they want from you rather than what you think you have. Now, brand is anything which brings your product to mind. So I'll share a few examples. I'm sure you'll get it quite early on. That's the idea. But a brand can be a particular colorway. It could be a mix of colors or a graphic device. It can be the unique shape of a product. It can be the typeface. It can be a phrase. It could be a sound that we're not hearing. It could be another sound that we're not hearing. So what I've got there, the first one is the opening of a bottle of fizzy brown sugar water.
Should we sing?
Ah, volume down. Fizzy brown sugar water. Okay, let's see what's going on here. Right, okay. Oh, yeah. It can be a sonic device, a jingle if you like, or a regular seasonal thing. All of these things are part of a brand, and all of those things come to you and tell you Coca-Cola. You don't need to see the word. You haven't seen the logo. I've deliberately not used the logo because actually in branding, quite often the logo is the least important thing. It's rare that people don't buy a product or buy a service because they don't like the logo. It's much more likely that they just don't understand the brand. Now, I like to describe brand as the difference between a product and a commodity. A brand has equity, which means you can charge more for your branded product or your branded commodity. Tap water versus Evian being a great example. But in anything, if you look, let's go back to brown fizzy water, Coca-Cola. You will pay more for Coca-Cola branded brown fizzy sugar water than you will for home brand. And that's because of brand. That's because of equity. It's a mental shortcut. People know that they're going to get something that isn't going to let them down. And one of the truths about how people buy is that people very rarely try to buy the best option. What they normally do is buy the option that's least likely to be shit, to be blunt. What's not going to let me down? What is going to satisfy us in this situation? If I go, so I'm diabetic, I can't drink the red Coke, but I know as soon as I see that silver can with the ribbon, I don't have to look to see the sugar content. I don't have to look to see if it's okay for me to drink. I just take that off shelf. It's immediate. People like to buy without thinking, and brand helps that happen. Because brand makes it easier for people to buy you in future. Mental availability is what it's called at Ehrenberg Bass. And basically what they say is that every brand needs mental availability, i.e. to be recalled at the point when you need a product of a certain type, and of course physical availability. So here we have physical availability on shelf, mental availability because I know that brand, I know it's not going to let me down, I pick it up. That's just how it works. So why is brand important? Particularly, why is brand marketing important? So we can say from common sense that people are less likely to buy brands they don't know, but actually we have the evidence. So this is a great piece of research that was done last year in Turkey, and they were able to show that the correlation between brand awareness and purchase intent is high. So the dotted line you see in the middle, that's perfect. So that means that only people that are aware of a brand buy it. We know that's not the case because sometimes people just grab something and there's no other options. But we have a very high correlation between purchase intent and brand awareness. People buy brands that they know. The double jeopardy law. So this is something that was established in How Brands Grow in 2010, which was a groundbreaking book genuinely in marketing. It was one of the first kind of leading moments of marketing science or empirical marketing. And what they showed there is that the biggest brands not only sell to more people, i.e. they have a larger customer base, but people buy from them more often. That's why it's called double jeopardy. So down here at the bottom, I don't know why Sensodyne isn't liked in China. Maybe they just don't like Sensodyne, but LMZ, I don't know what that is, but I certainly know what Crest and Colgate is. We know that those are strong global brands, and it's no surprise that they're dominating in the market. But to dominate both in terms of penetration, i.e. the number of people that are buying you, and loyalty, the frequency that people are buying you, shows again the power of brand. There's something else which tells us a lot about buying habits and in particular how performance marketing works. So John Dawes from Edinburgh Bass Institute was working with the LinkedIn B2B Institute, and they discovered something called the 95-5 rule. This is a B2B thing. It's similar in B2C, but the numbers are slightly different. So in B2B, at any given point in time of your target market, people that will be buying from your category at some point, only 5% of them are in buying mode. So when you're doing performance marketing or activation marketing, the most that you can get is 5% at any given time of that market. And so you will get your market share of that 5%. The important thing here is that the 100% are still going to see your advertising. They're going to see your performance ads. So you need to do something memorable so that when the other 95%, when it's their turn to be in a 5%, they're more likely to buy you. Because as we know, people don't buy brands that they don't know. Now, the long and the short of it is, it's a brilliant book. It's 14 years old now. No, 10 years old now. My apologies. So Les Burnett and Peter Field, they spent a long time. So these are known as the godfathers of effectiveness, right? I'm a massive marketing nerd, you can probably tell. But they went through the entire database of the IPA effectiveness program, and they discovered that on average, companies that spend 60% of their marketing budget on brand compared to 40% of their budget on performance grow further. Because what happens is brand building builds long-term sales growth. When I'm talking about it or pitching a client, I talk about it being demand generation. We're creating future demand or future sales. Whereas the activations are picking up sales. They're picking up from the 5% at any given time. Now, the one thing I don't like about this graph, and this is the original, is that what this shows is that actually performance stays flat, and that's just not the case. Performance does grow across time. So I'm going to bring in Tom Roach, who is a brilliant strategist, and his version of the graph shows that sales activation increases performance along with the brand build. Again, brand marketing helps performance marketing improve and work better, work harder. Now, the tricky thing is, and this is the big challenge in marketing, and this is something that marketers, CMOs talk about all the time. How do I quantify brand investment? I know that I can go to my CFO, I know I can go to my CEO and say, okay, give me 10 grand and I'll give you a 5.1 ROI with performance marketing. But how do you make the case for brand investment? Well, there's a few things in there that you can do. So if you were to do a brand tracking survey, you'd be able to work out across the market from the entire or representative amount of people from the entire category buying group, i.e. anybody that's going to buy what you're selling, whether it's from you or a competitor, how many of them know your brand, how many of them would consider your brand, and what the preference is. A preference usually converts quite directly into sales, into purchase. But also, you get that same funnel for all of your competition. And you can also see the category norm, in which case you can then look at the funnel and see where you're underperforming. Now, the important thing is that the funnel will follow through. So if consideration goes down 50%, increasing consideration will still go down 50%. So it will lead to bigger sales. So you can project this. If you see where you're broken, and then you come up with a strategy about fixing a point in the funnel, you can project what the outcome is going to be in a long-term brand building way. One of the other things that you get from brand study is attributes. So it might well be that in order to sell more, you need to be seen as being innovative or being seen as having value for money. Again, you can track how close your brand is compared to other brands and work out where you can win. And again, you invest in that and you project the outcomes. Those are ways of saying, okay, if you give me the money now, at the end of the year, you will get this. On top of what we do with performance marketing, and performance marketing will improve. Another one, and I know Stephen's going to be looking at this later too. So this is excess share of voice. Is anyone familiar with excess share of voice? Okay, good. I can be boring then. So, market share is just the amount of the particular category that a business makes or a business sells to the entire category. So you might have a 10% market share. Now, share of voice is how visible you are to the consumers. Now, traditionally, this was assessed by advertising spend, which isn't a great metric because it doesn't take into account the fact that creative advertising delivers better results than dull advertising. There was a piece of research done recently which showed that typically in the UK, for a dull advert, you would have to spend £10 million more on your media spend than a creative advert to make the same results. So this doesn't account for that, but there's a brilliant new metric which is share of search. So if you were to look at the share of brand search, i.e. your brand name compared to your competitors' brand names, that will give you a much more realistic share of voice. So this is where the interesting things comes into projections. Because if your share of market is the same as your share of voice, then your brand is in equilibrium. It's stable. It's not growing and it's not dropping. And that's probably good enough for most people. Now, if your share of voice is lower than your share of market, then you're heading towards decline. So you need to prop that up. But more importantly, if your share of voice is bigger than your share of market, you are going to grow over the next year. And the way that this has been calculated is that, so excess share of voice is the share of voice minus market share or share of market. For every 10 points difference, you can project that your brand or your profit, your turnover is going to grow between 0.3 and 1.2%. That's not your turnover growing by 1.2%, that's your market share. So if in fact you're a brand, let's say in services, it's 1.2. So if you're a professional services business, let's say a digital agency, then having a 10-point difference between share of voice and market share, if you've only got 1.2% of the market, doubles your business over the next year. It's as simple as that. You can project that. It's give or take a little bit, but it is a way of justifying investment in brand. And alongside this, we've got the performance marketing. And of course, as I said, that is going to improve along time too. Now, marketers talk a lot about KPIs. KPIs are key performance indicators. They're only indicators. Far more important are OKRs, your objectives and your key results. So when you're setting out a case for investing in brand, you need to use OKRs because they talk about what your objective is, and your objective might be to grow your market share, or let's say it might be to add 10% to the consideration stage of the funnel. That's a perfectly adequate objective. The key result of that is going to be adding 10% to your bottom line, because that's how it flows down. OKRs must always be SMART, i.e. specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Typically, when we're talking brand, we're talking from a year to maybe 3 years. I wouldn't go beyond 3 years. 5-year plans are great ideas, but in terms of mapping out a strategy, there's so much change that 3 years is probably makes sense as the higher end of it. And what they do is, we know that incremental sales create greater revenues of profit, and they can be forecast through improving the funnel or excess share of voice. And of course, it can be verified by the absolute business bottom lines, revenue growth, greater market share, and better activation on ROI. So brand.
Yeah. What is it good for? Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.